Madam Speaker, it's no secret that there are many challenges to democracy in our hemisphere. There are a number of anti-democratic regimes within our hemisphere that are doing everything they can to expand their influence, to expand their anti-American, anti-democratic, anti-freedom agenda across the hemisphere. But tonight, I want to speak about a small little country in Central America that is fighting a heroic battle to stop that trend, to keep their democracy alive, to keep their freedoms, their rule of law, their electoral process intact. And that is Honduras. The people of Honduras, Madam Speaker, have for decades had a democratic process. It's been a process that's frankly been a model for many around the world. They have great established democratic institutions. They've had presidential and other elections on regular cycles. And that took place again in November of 2005, when a new president was elected. Mr. Manuel Zelaya was elected. What happened, though, unfortunately, Madam Speaker, is that president then started going in the same direction as other authoritarian regimes had gone, like Mr. Chavez in Venezuela. And he started violating the Constitution. He started violating the rule of law. Not to mention, obviously, other things like massive corruption and theft and allegations of ties with the narco, with drug trafficking. But again, he also was violating the Constitution. In March 23, 2009, right almost at the end of this man's term, he then started an illegal effort to try to change the Constitution so that he could stay in power, remain as president after his term had expired. Now, we need to understand something, that because Honduras had had dictatorships in the past, their Constitution, which is revered by the people there, was very clear that you could not do that. You could only serve one term as president, and that's it, for life. You could not do it again. Article 4 of that Constitution states very clearly that a president's term may never, is one term, and that part of the Constitution can never be amended. In other words, a president cannot try to stay on after his term. March 25th, the Office of the Public Prosecutor, as again I mentioned because President Zelaya tried to start the process so that he could remain in power, the Office of the Public Prosecutor begins investigating what President Zelaya is doing, focusing on the legality or the possible illegality of that proposed referendum to change the Constitution. May 8th, 2009, because of President Zelaya's actions were a clear violation of the Constitution, the Attorney General also petitions the Administrative Law Tribunal to stop this illegal process that President Zelaya was trying to do, a referendum, again, so that he could keep himself in power. May 11th, 2009, the Office of the Public Prosecutor publicly states that the referendum violates the Constitution. On May 12th, 2009, the Administrative Law Tribunal issues a temporary injunction prohibiting this referendum that President Zelaya is trying to do to keep himself in power from taking place. May 27th, 2009, the Administrative Law Tribunal rules that the referendum violates the Constitution and orders suspension of all acts in its support. May 28th, 2009, despite the referendum already have been declared illegal by the Administrative Law Tribunal, then President Zelaya continues to advocate for that referendum so that he can stay in power. On May 29th, 2009, the Administrative Law Tribunal clarifies its previous May 27th ruling, explaining that any and all acts that would lead to any vote or poll similar to the referendum that President Zelaya was trying to put forward is a violation of the Constitution. On June 9th, 2009, the Appellate Court now of Administrative Law Tribunal unanimously rules that Zelaya's actions violate the Constitution. I think you're starting to see a pattern here, that there is a broad consensus in the courts and everywhere that what Mr. Zelaya is trying to do to keep himself in power is in violation of their country's constitution. June 19th, 2009, the Honduran Appeals Court orders the Honduran Armed Forces to not provide any support for this proposed referendum that the president was trying to do to keep himself in power. June 24th, 2009, Zelaya orders the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of the Defense to violate the Constitution and to carry out the referendum, which again has already been ruled unconstitutional. And I want to, why would he ask the armed forces to do that? Because under Article 272 of that country's constitution, it states that the armed forces is the one that carries out the elections and helps in the elections, but the armed forces says, no, Mr. President, we're not going to violate the Constitution and the court rulings. So when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense refuses to carry out the illegal orders of the president to violate the Constitution, what does President Zelaya do? He fires them both. On June 25, 2009, the Office of the Public Prosecutor files a motion with the Honduran Supreme Court of Justice to reinstate the Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman, Mr. Velázquez. June 25th, same day, the Honduran Supreme Court of Justice now unanimously rules that Zelaya's dismissal of General Velázquez is another violation of the Constitution. Again, this constitutes one of multiple violations of the Constitution by President Zelaya, and he's trying to do all this so that he can stay in power despite the Constitution. Now, since this referendum that President Zelaya continues to try to do had been ruled illegal, and they can't print the ballots, what does President Zelaya do? He has ballots printed in Venezuela by Hugo Chavez. Everybody in our country knows who Hugo Chavez is. Those ballots are then flown in to the country to try to go ahead with this illegal referendum to change the Constitution, I repeat, so that Mr. Zelaya can stay in power. Well, June 25th, 2009, the Honduran Supreme Electoral Tribunal declares that the referendum violates the Constitution once again and orders that the armed forces take custody of those illegal ballots printed in Hugo Chávez's Venezuela. The same day, June 25th, the Office of the Public Prosecutor files a criminal complaint against President Zelaya for treason, abuse of authority, and usurpation of power. June 26, 2009, Zelaya makes public a secret executive order rescinding his original intent referendum, replacing it with another one, and basically, again, continuing to go forward to try to change the Constitution so that he can stay in power as president. I don't know for how long he had the intention of staying in power. June 27th, Zelaya then leads a mob of supporters, because remember the armed forces had held these illegal ballots. Well, he then leads a mob in violation of court orders of the Supreme Court, etc., and he breaks in to where those ballots had been held by the military, a military base, and he takes them out with the intention of start distributing them, despite the fact that there had been multiple court rulings saying that they were illegal. Well then, June 28th, 2009, the Honduran Supreme Court of Justice issues an arrest warrant for President Zelaya and orders the armed forces to arrest him. Remember, this is a court order by the Honduran Supreme Court of Justice ordering the military, and I mentioned before that the military are the ones in their constitution who are responsible to enforce that. They order the military to go ahead and arrest them. So yes, the armed forces carry out those orders. Now, June 28th, the legislature, the Congress of that country, votes 124-4 also to remove President Zelaya because of his multiple violations of the Constitution. June 28th, 2009, a Special Congressional Commission issued a report on Zelaya's action. Special Congressional Commission, and based on this report, the Congress votes 124-4 to remove Zelaya and replace him with the person who in their Constitution was next in line. And that was, who was available was the Speaker of the House, Mr. Micheletti. He becomes the President. June 28th, the armed forces, as a defender of the Constitution, decides that instead of imprisoning Mr. Zelaya, as they had been told to do, following those court orders, instead of imprisoning him, what they do is they put him on an airplane and they send him to neighboring Costa Rica. Now, that is what has happened. The democratic process continues in Honduras. The elections that were convened before this whole issue and this whole crisis started, those have continued to go forward. So here's the good news, that despite that challenge, the Honduran people, the democratic institutions, that democratic country is going forward with their elections. Those elections are going to be taking place the 29th of November. And obviously, we here in the United States and the world should be applauding that heroic people. The way that they're following their Constitution, they're preserving their institutions, they're preserving their rule of law, their freedom, and their democracy. But unfortunately, Madam Speaker, that's not the case. Because of the pressure of individuals like the Castro dictatorship and Hugo Chavez, unfortunately, even the United States is now saying that the Honduran people should not have elections, that they don't deserve those elections, that they should not go forward with those elections. Madam Speaker, think of the sacrifice of the American people, particularly our men and women in arms, in uniform, who have done so much and sacrificed so much so that people around the world can have elections. And here we have a neighboring country, an ally of the United States, who are about to have elections, who are about to fulfill their people's dreams. They're going to have presidential elections, municipal elections, congressional elections. And are we celebrating it? Are we encouraging them? Are we helping them? No. We're trying to stop them. We're trying to impose a dictatorship, and we're trying to stop them. How unfortunate and how short-sighted, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm joined today by a number of individuals that I have the highest admiration and respect for. I would like to first recognize Mr. ROSKAM from the state of Illinois. Mr. ROSKAM has been looking at this issue, has been analyzing this issue, speaking up on this issue, and it is a privilege to recognize him for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, a couple of weeks ago, I was out with a group of members of Congress, and my BlackBerry went off. And I read my BlackBerry, and there it was, and it was a message, and it said that Senator DeMint was going to be going to Honduras. And the senator from South Carolina was making that journey available to other members of Congress who had a desire to go. And I made the decision. I said, hey, I want to go down to see what's going on there, to see with my own eyes what's happening in Honduras. I was joined by the gentleman from Illinois, Representative Schock, the gentleman from Colorado, Representative Lamborn, and the four of us went down on what's called a congressional delegation. In we flew. It was a one-day trip, a short trip. In we flew, and we landed in Honduras. And what a great privilege to meet with those people. Let me tell you a little bit about that trip, Madam Speaker. We met with President Micheletti and his leadership team. We met with the Honduran Supreme Court. We met with the leading presidential candidates who are running for office in the race that the gentleman from Florida mentioned that is going to convene on November 29th of this year. We met with the Independent Election Commission, and we met with members of civil society. In other words, those people who are participants in the culture and economy and religious life of Honduras, including Americans who have lived down there, Madam Speaker, for as long as 25 years. And as the four of us gathered and listened and asked questions of these folks who represented the leadership and a wide range of perspectives across Honduras, there is one word that comes to mind that was universal in how they were perceiving the United States of America, and that single word was bewilderment. They were bewildered because from their perspective, they had been coloring within the lines. From their perspective, they look to the north at this nation that they admire, this nation that they have a relationship with, this nation that they look to, and yet this nation was looking at them askance. Now think about that. This is a nation, the United States of America, that is willing to enter into conversations, directly or indirectly, with Ahmadinejad of Iran. We're willing to enter into conversations, directly or indirectly, with the Castro brothers of Cuba. But we are not willing to be in a conversation with this group, this longtime ally, the country of Honduras. And let me tell you where it breaks down from my perspective. We met with President Micheletti, and all of us who are members of Congress and members of the general public, we've all been in meetings that have been highly manipulated, and we know when there's a hustle going on, and you can kind of feel it. You know when it's scripted, when somebody is saying, oh, you say this, and you say this, and you say this. But I'm telling you, in this meeting, there was a great deal of spontaneity, and that was true of all of these meetings, Madam Speaker. All 5 of these meetings that I just described, they were spontaneous. And in the course of the meetings, President Micheletti admitted 2 mistakes. He was very transparent, and he said, look, we didn't have the authority to remove President Zelaya from the country. We didn't have the authority to do it. It was a mistake. Now, he was charging the military base and so forth, but President Micheletti acknowledged that they didn't have the authority to do it. He also said, look, we didn't have the authority to shut down 2 television stations. They were small stations. They were broadcasting insurrection. We didn't have the authority to shut them down. It was a mistake. We regret it. We are moving to open them up and so forth. But I cannot even begin to convey to you the sense of bewilderment, Madam Speaker, that the Hondurans have. Here we are, that the Hondurans express. Here we are, members of the United States Congress, and we're seated with the Honduran Supreme Court. And I'm thinking to myself, frankly, who am I, or who are we, to pass judgment on the Honduran Supreme Court on how they're interpreting their own constitution, right? But they say to us, look, and they made it very, very clear, we issued the order that the military followed. The military didn't tell us what to do. We, a civilian Supreme Court, issued the order and told them what to do. And I think that that's pivotal. When I was down there with Representative Schock, who's joining us tonight, and others, it was clear to me there's more police officers, Madam Speaker, around the United States Capitol tonight than there is around the presidential palace in Honduras. So the characterization of this as a military coup, I think, is casting it, frankly, in a false light. So, all kinds of drama going back in the past, all kinds of situations as you look back in the past, some mistakes, some not mistakes, some things characterized a certain way, some things not characterized a certain way. Where do we go from here? Well, I'll tell you exactly where we go from here. We go to November 29th. Now, we as a country historically have looked to elections of a free people as the remedy moving forward. We have historically said, notwithstanding the background of a nation, if there is a free, fair, and open election, we are going to recognize and acknowledge the government that is subsequent to that. And I wholeheartedly believe, and I wholeheartedly hope, that the Obama administration, Secretary Clinton, will lay out a parameter by which the Honduran government can satisfy the administration that they're going to move forward. In other words, if the Honduran people make a decision on November 29th, and let's remember, President Zelaya, former president, is not going to be on the ballot. President Micheletti, who is currently in office for this collapsing duration of time, is not going to be on the ballot. It's several other individuals who campaigned, got their nominations, they're on the ballot for their parties. Those are the individuals who are campaigning for office. And when we met with those individuals, not a one of them had a suspicion that there was anything that was untoward in this upcoming election. They all felt as if it was going to be pure as the wind-driven snow. And I'll yield to the gentleman.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, I will.
You just mentioned the democratic process that's going on, that's ongoing. It is accurate to say, is it not, that that's a process that has been going on for about a year. And those candidates that you met with are the same candidates that have been in this process that were elected in open primary elections to represent their respective parties. So that has not changed. There's no change there. That process is the same clean, clear, democratic process that has been going on way before any of this controversy took place, and they're the same candidates, are they not?
They are exactly the same candidates. Reclaiming my time, absolutely. And when Representative Schock and I met with the individuals who are who are those that are in charge of administering the elections, frankly, they made it very clear to us they were not happy to meet with us at the place where we had to meet. They felt like we shouldn't. They shouldn't be there in the presidential palace, but they were humoring us, they were accommodating us and being very gracious to us, but they made it very clear that they weren't happy to meet with us there. Why? Because their job is to ensure the integrity of the ballot. So here's where we go. So we're looking at November 29th. The Honduran people are going to make a decision. They're going to choose one of these these nominees who have been nominated by their party, and the United States government then is going to have a decision to make. I think it is wise. I think it drives towards stability. I think it drives towards prosperity and really a good, solid foundation for us, for the American people, to recognize the legitimately elected officials, that government that the Honduran people themselves choose on November 29th. I think it would be a devastating mistake if we were to look at the Hondurans in the eye and say, you know what, we really don't care who you choose. We're going to manipulate and we're going to decide who your next president is going to be. Heaven help us if we go that route. When we're a nation that historically has stood up and said that we're going to stand for free, open, and fair elections. And I'm the first to say, and I think you are too, Mr. Diaz-Balart, that if there's any nonsense that was to go on in an election, you would be the first one to jump in. But there's been no indication whatsoever, none. And even from the presidential candidates that are currently running, in the conversations that Representative Schock and I knew you had, and others when you went with Ms. Ileana Ross-Layton and others down to Honduras. So I think it's incumbent upon us to stand up, to stand with the Honduran people, to come alongside them in this time of real turmoil. And just in closing, I just want to make one observation. In the meeting that we had, you know, the United States has, I think, unfortunately cut off very pivotal aid right now to the country of Honduras. But as one of the Honduran individuals said to me, he said, you know, we can endure the lack of aid, but we're not able. What good is aid to us if we give up our country? What good is aid to us if we give up our country? And I think, Madam Speaker, that is a good watchword, and upon which I think we need to rest our foreign policy. And I would encourage the Obama administration to take that to heart. And with that, I yield back to the gentleman.
I want to thank the gentleman. The gentleman mentioned bewilderment, that the Honduran people are frankly in awe, wondering what is going on. All they want to do is continue to have their democratic process, to have their elections that were pre-scheduled. A person who asked that question and tried to get some real answers was an individual who you already met, who went with you to Honduras, and a person who obviously has dedicated his young but very productive life to public service. So I'd like to recognize now the other gentleman from your state, who was also down there with you, Mr. Schock. Interesting. I know you had some of the same questions. And I guess what you asked the Library of Congress, right, to look into it.
Thank you, Mr. Diaz-Balart. Look, shortly after I was born in the 1980s, much of Latin America and Central America was struggling with the issue of democracy. And through much of that decade, it was the goal of the administration, the goal of this country, to promote and transition to democracies in that region. And so through much of my life, I have watched these countries continue to grow, continue to strengthen the relationship with the United States, continue to be a friend and an ally to the United States. And that was my understanding of that region of the country. Now, I'm not an attorney. I'm not a constitutional law expert. I certainly do not know the Honduran Constitution chapter and verse. And so when the events took place on June 28th, And our State Department and this administration quickly said, well, this was a coup d'etat, that what occurred there was wrong, that what occurred there was a violation of their Constitution, and began demanding that the Honduran people and the government there turn back on the decisions they had made. I didn't know what to think. And before jumping to conclusions, before getting on board with our State Department's position or opposing our State Department's position, I enlisted the support of the many resources that we have as elected members of Congress, namely the Congressional Research Service. And in July, I wrote to the Congressional Research Service and I asked them to look into the events that occurred in Honduras, to look at the Honduran Constitution, and to tell me, chapter and verse, whether or not what occurred there in Honduras was in fact within keeping with the Honduran law, or whether or not it was a violation of their Constitution. The Congressional Research Service then reached out to the Law Library, the Library of Congress, and I patiently waited for over 2 months for them to generate this report. And in September, they provided this report on Honduras, the constitutional law issues that we have raised about this situation. And they did a very thorough analysis and went through basically chapter and verse of the Honduran Constitution and what occurred in Honduras, and basically came to the conclusion that what occurred there was within keeping of the Honduran Constitution, that the Congress and the Supreme Court have the authority to hold their elected representatives accountable, have the authority to vote and take action when they believe that the leaders of their country are dilatory in their duties, and to ask that they be removed. However, the report also found that the expulsion of Mr. Zelaya from the country was a violation of their Constitution. They cite the portion of the Constitution that clearly says even if you violate Honduran law, you are to be prosecuted, you can be imprisoned, but you cannot be expelled from the country. Now, it's pretty clear to me what was legal, what wasn't legal. And stepping back and looking at the current State Department's position, I kind of scratched my head and wondered, well, where is their justification? Where is their chapter and verse? Where is their black and white outline of justifying their position, which says that what occurred there was not legal? And other than to say, well, we don't like what happened, we don't like the tone, we don't like the precedent, we don't like the way it looks, I haven't seen a counterpoint, I haven't seen a counter report from the State Department going through chapter and verse, giving a legal opinion on why this was a violation of Honduran Constitution. Furthermore, we can all have a debate here tonight about what should happen with those issues which we all agree on should not have occurred, namely the expulsion of Mr. Zelaya from the country. But what I want to say is this. First of all, we as a country must uphold the rule of law, and we as a country must respect other countries' constitutions. Whether they're the way we would write the Constitution, whether we like the way the Constitution is written, really is irrelevant. The fact of the matter is, for us to suggest otherwise, for us to suggest, well, your Constitution has to look like our Constitution, your process has to look like our process, really is giving us the symbol of the ugly American, if you will, in the world. That somehow we believe everyone should look like the United States of America in all of our forms, including our Constitution. And what's important, however, is that the Constitution is written by the local citizens and respected, and the rule of law is upheld. And I have to think back to just a year ago about this time. Prior to being in Congress, I was in the State House in Illinois. And in December of last year, our legislature, of which I was a member, started a process according to our Constitution in the state of Illinois to remove our duly elected leader, our governor. Now, our governor had not been convicted of any crime. He had not been indicted in any crime. He had not been brought to trial in any crime. But our Constitution clearly said in the state of Illinois, if and when a majority of the legislature deems that the governor is dilatory in their duties, they can have them removed. And our legislature followed that Constitution and had them removed. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, not everybody in the state of Illinois agreed. Certainly not everyone in this country agreed with removing a sitting office holder, namely a governor, prior to conviction from office. However, it was allowed for in the Constitution, and you saw no one in federal government, certainly not our President of this United States, who happens to come from Illinois, call out and say that this was somehow fly in the face of democracy or some great injustice had occurred. A few years earlier in the same decade, the citizens of California decided that their governor was dilatory in his duties, that their governor, who was duly elected, who had not been convicted of any crime, who had not gone to trial for any malfeasance, should be removed from office. However, their constitution required that his removal be done by a different process, through voter referendum and through a recall provision. Now, the reason I point this out is because we have 50 states in the Union, and every state has a different constitution, every state has a different process, and each process is different. Each process is unique, and what is important is not each process is the same, but that the rule of law is upheld. And I would argue, Madam Speaker, that the same is true in Honduras. The Honduras people have a different constitution. However, based on the findings of this law review, based on the findings of many legal experts, what occurred there up until the point of Mr. Zelaya's expulsion was within keeping with the Honduran Constitution. And what is important moving forward is not necessarily whether or not Mr. Zelaya is held in the Brazilian embassy, whether he's brought to trial, whether he gets amnesty, whatever. What's important is that we continue to promote democracy, we continue to promote free and fair elections around the world, and specifically in Honduras. And I can't help but think that as we start to celebrate the elections that are upcoming in Afghanistan, which will take place in less than 2 weeks, where men and women from our armed forces have fought and died, much to the similar in Iraq, that we would look to a friend of the United States for over 30 years, a democracy in Central America, and say to them, you know what, because of this issue with your removal of your president, we're not going to uphold democracy in your country. We're not going to seek free and fair elections in your country. It seems preposterous. And so I really tonight am asking the State Department, show us your plan. What is the end game for Honduras? What is the end game for democracy in that region? Because my friends who join me here tonight, we only see one solution to continuing to promote democracy in that region, and it's free and fair and open elections in Honduras. 6 candidates were nominated by their parties in May. 6 candidates have campaigned for this position for nearly a year, and 6 candidates will be the options for the Honduran people to vote on November 29th. And whomever the Honduran people vote for, the candidates for office we met with made it very clear they will support the outcome of the election. The interim president, Micheletti, made it very clear upon those elections he looks forward to surrendering the power to the incoming president and going back to his duties in the Congress. So the end of the game that I see is we need to be pushing for free and fair elections. We need to be pushing for the rule of law and democracy in Honduras, and making sure that the will of the Honduran people is respected on November 29th. And we as the United States of America, promoters of freedom around the world, send election observers, send the resources and the support necessary to ensure that free and fair elections occur on November 29th in Honduras. And with that, Mr. Diaz-Balart, I yield back.
Thank you. I think you were very clear in illustrating what exactly did take place. And you mentioned, what is the end game? What is the solution? What is what we should all strive for? It's elections. That solves the issue. Those elections are going to take place on November 29th. And that is the solution. We should be applauding them. We should be supporting those elections. And unfortunately, this administration is trying to do everything in its power to try to stop those elections from taking place. Now, a person who frankly, one of the people that I most admire in this process, who has done so much to help push for elections, particularly for those areas where they have not been able to do so for generations, who is an advocate of freedom around the world. I'm anxious to hear, Mr. Burton, what you have to say, because nobody knows and has fought for elections around the globe like you have. It's a privilege to have you here.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I'd just like to say that one day, hopefully, in the not-too-distant future we'll see free and fair elections in your former native land of Cuba. And with that, let me just say that I have heard in my years here in the Congress a lot of very thorough and eloquent expressions of concern about what's going on in foreign policy and foreign lands, but the young gentleman from Illinois just covered about everything about as thoroughly as you possibly can. The one thing that I think I might add is that there are those who say the election should be postponed and that there are reasons for that. But according to what I've been able to learn from our research is that the Supreme Court of Honduras rendered a decision after careful study. And they said that what was done was constitutional. It was within the law. And they upheld that decision. And they have said that the election should go forth. And they are now in control of the election process. And I believe that it should go forth. And for the United States of America and our State Department and our very young and new president, whom I feel probably does not have the expertise that he requires to make these kinds of decisions, although I'm sure that he would like to see his position supported. I think that we should support the Honduran people, support a free and fair election, and let our State Department know that the members of the Congress, here in Congress, feel very strongly that they have made a miscalculation and a misdiagnosis of what the situation is or should be down in Honduras, and they should change their mind and come back and support the constitutional elective process in Honduras and let the elections go forth with our support. The United States of America should support the free election process in Honduras, and our State Department should share that view. And that's why tonight you have a number of congressmen here on the floor of the House who are saying to the administration and the State Department, you've made a mistake. As the young gentleman said from Illinois, this has been researched very thoroughly by our legal authorities and experts here in the Congress of the United States, and they have concluded that the only thing that was done that was not correct was forcing the former president out of the country. But it did not say anything that would contradict the decision that was made by the administration that showed that there was some unconstitutional things done and supported by the previous president. And the Supreme Court has rendered that decision, and they've said the election should go forth, and we should support that position. And if I were talking to our Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton, or to the President, I would say the administration and the State Department should support that position. And I really appreciate you and your brother and the rest of the people that are here on the floor tonight. I really appreciate you staying so late. It's 11:45. And the people of this country, I hope, who might be paying attention, will realize that we feel this is extremely important for stability in our hemisphere, in our front yard, and that we feel very strongly that the administration and the State Department should review this and come out in very strong support of the elective process, which should be taking place very shortly. And with that, I thank you very much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. I want to thank you for those words. And I, you know, again, what we keep talking about is that there is a solution. There's a very simple solution. There's a very simple answer to this crisis. And it's the answer and it's the solution that men and women for generations, American men and women for generations, have given their lives for. And that's for the ability of people to elect their leaders for free and clear multi-party elections. The Honduran people are in that process already, a process that has been going on for over a year, a process that has not been interrupted. And how we cannot support that process is frankly beyond me. I don't know, maybe the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. McCotter, who is one of the keen intellects in this body, can have some explanation as to how elections are not, for some reason, all of a sudden, the answer why the Honduran people should not have the right to elect their next president. It's a privilege to have you, sir. I recognize you as long as you like.
I thank the gentleman. I know the hour is late. We're heading toward the witching hour, so I'll try to put some remarks in a very succinct fashion. First, I'd like to point out some of the principles which undergird our position in support of the Honduran people. One is that we as Americans understand our self-evident right to liberty is from God, not the government, and no tyrant or terrorist can interfere with it. We also understand that Americans, our security is from strength, not surrender, and that our greatest strength is the expansion of liberty to others to ensure freedom for ourselves. We also understand, it's painfully evident with Honduras, that the United States and all free people are targets of tyrants and terrorists, not because of our actions, but because of our existence. The existence of free people, the rule of law, the pursuit of one's happiness in accordance with one's inalienable rights is a threat to all tyrants and despots throughout the world, for their thrones are unstable in the presence of free people and oppressed people who are inspired by such examples. With the Honduras situation, we see crystal clear that the United States in many ways in our foreign affairs has gotten away from these fundamental principles and concepts. And the danger, not only to our allies like Honduras, is great. I pose one example. Can this administration, for the edification of individuals like myself who may not grasp the intricacies and the genius of their foreign policy, explain one thing? What is the difference between women being shot in the streets of Iran for trying to be free and the difference between a constitutional democracy in Honduras following the rule of law to protect itself from a would-be tyrant? This administration said these situations are distinguishable because in the instance of the Iranians' murderous regime, that is an internal affair for the Iranian people. And yet when the free people of Honduras, through the rule of law in defense of their constitutional democracy, exercise their means of self-defense, we are told that that is of the utmost interest to the United States and we must demand an outcome in accordance with our will and the will of the OAS, which now includes Mr. Fidel Castro, no fan of elections. Can you tell me why the freedom of the Iranian people is to be left in the hands of their murderers? And why the freedom of the Honduran people is to be taken from theirs and put in the hands of butchers like Fidel Castro and others, such as Chavez? I eagerly await a response, although I do not know that I will find it edifying, let alone satisfactory. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and also coming us tonight is a person who also has a distinguished record, effective record of fighting for human rights, freedom around the globe. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lincoln Diaz-Balart.
Well, I want to thank you for calling this special order, convoking it, and focusing in on this very important, really critical subject. Churchill talked about the fact that facts are better than dreams. There are facts with regard to the crisis in Honduras. The people of Honduras acted constitutionally. Their institutions acted constitutionally in removing a president who was acting unconstitutionally. And they removed him. The institutions, the democratic institutions of Honduras, removed a president who had been acting unconstitutionally on June 28th. Those are facts. The Obama administration is wrong when, in this case, it sides with Chavez and Castro, Ortega, Correa, the other anti-democratic elements in this hemisphere who are pressuring for the imposition of the president who had violated the Constitution in Honduras, for his return, his forceful return unconstitutionally to power. The Obama administration is wrong. That's a fact. Now, there's another fact that's of importance, and that is that we saw a number of members of Congress here almost at midnight, because of the importance of this issue, tell the American people that after thorough study, they have come to the conclusion that the Obama administration is wrong and that the Honduran people acted appropriately. It's a fact that there is a growing number of members of Congress who are becoming involved, educated, and are expressing themselves with regard to this issue. That's a fact that the Obama administration needs to take into consideration. Because, as was mentioned before, even if the situation were different, and even if the Hondurans had acted unconstitutionally in removing President Zelaya from power, the solution to the crisis should be evident to all. Free and fair elections, especially when the candidates were chosen before the crisis began by all of the political parties. So what is most not only incorrect but almost inconceivable, Madam Speaker, is that the Obama administration is not only wrong with regard to what happened in Honduras, is not only wrong with regard to who it is siding with and who it is siding against, but that even if the administration were not wrong with regard to what has happened, the evident solution being the elections of November 29th are not being supported by the Obama administration. But the Obama administration is saying that they will not recognize the will of the Honduran people as expressed on November 29th. That is inconceivable. Beyond wrong. That is inconceivable, Madam Speaker. So, facts. Congress is aware of how wrong the administration is. Congress is aware that the Honduran people are proceeding with an election, November 29th. The reason that the majority leadership is not bringing to the floor of this House a resolution to express support for the elections, that resolution was filed by Mrs. Ross-Layton and others, expressing support for the elections that are going to be held November 29th. The reason the majority leadership doesn't bring that resolution to the floor is because it would win a majority vote. Because, fact, a growing number of members of Congress, I maintain by now a majority of this House, are aware of the gross unfairness with which that small nation is being treated by this administration. And so I think it's important for the administration, Madam Speaker, to take note. Tonight, almost at midnight, Honduras, despite the pressure, despite the fact that it's a small country, is moving forward with elections. Those elections deserve not only support and respect, but commendation. And further efforts to deny the Honduran people their right of self-determination, their right to express themselves freely and by secret ballot on November 29th is wrong. That's a fact. More and more people in this Congress are learning the facts, and I hope, Madam Speaker, that the administration takes note and reverses itself, backs off from not supporting elections, from not supporting free determination, and rather supports the Honduran people. I thank you, Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, for focusing attention and for your leadership role on this critical issue. Not only the people of Honduras deserve it, but the hemisphere requires the further attention of the American people to this critical issue. Thank you very much.
I want to thank the gentleman for Florida for really summing it up so well. That yes, regardless of what may have happened, the solution is there. It's evident. It's the elections that are coming up. The American people need to understand, need to know that this administration, unfortunately, is siding with Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro in trying to stop the democracy, the democratic process, the elections that are about to take place in Honduras. They need to know that. And this administration needs to understand that history will judge this administration if it does not reverse itself and sides with the people of Honduras, with their election, with their freedom. And also, the Honduran people need to understand that we have great admiration for them, that we respect their process, their constitution, and we commend them for going forward with their elections, their free, democratic, multi-party elections. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and with that, I would yield back the remaining part of my time.